Rome burns. This is where one story ends and another begins, in the heart of a city that once believed itself eternal. Black smoke, thick and choking, rises in columns against the bruised twilight sky, blotting out the familiar constellations above the seven hills. It pours from the windows of patrician villas and humble insulae alike, a dark shroud for an empire's dying light. Down below, in the labyrinth of stone streets, people are running. Their shouts are sharp, swallowed by the greater roar of the flames and the percussive clang of metal on metal. A city that once shone with the brilliance of marble and gold, a beacon of order for a conquered world, now looks like a dying star collapsing in upon itself. This is not the end in a single terrible night, though it feels like it to those who watch their world turn to ash. It is not one sudden cataclysm, but 1,000 small endings, a cascade of failures joined together over centuries. It is the slow, almost imperceptible crack that spiders across the surface of a great ceramic pot before it finally shatters into pieces. The story moves across generations, a vast and complex tapestry woven from countless individual choices, desperate battles fought on forgotten frontiers, and the persistent, gnawing ache of hunger. This is the story of how something so vast and seemingly permanent can simply cease to be. For centuries, Rome was more than a city, it was an idea. It began as a small, unassuming town on the banks of the Tiber, a settlement of farmers and shepherds. Yet through ambition, military genius, and an unparalleled gift for organization, it grew into the heart of a sprawling empire. Its dominion stretched from the misty shores of Britain to the sun-scorched sands of Egypt, a world stitched together by legions' laws and stone-paved roads. For a long time, Rome gave its subjects a fragile but tangible peace, the Pax Romana. People paid their taxes, soldiers guarded the frontiers, and cities grew rich on the fruits of trade and conquest. Temples and forums rose like mountains of human achievement. But even the most formidable power can hide a deep and festering wound, a vulnerability that grows unseen until it is too late. The first and perhaps deepest wound was internal. As Rome's power swelled, so too did its pride and its complacency. The leadership of the empire became a prize to be won by the sword, not a duty to be earned by merit. Emperors came and went with terrifying speed, many of them weak, cruel, or simply incompetent, their reigns often ending with an assassin's blade. The constant civil wars drained the treasury and bled the legions, turning Roman against Roman. As the state lost its moral authority, corruption spread like a plague, hollowing out the institutions that held the empire together. The throne became a death sentence. Dozens claimed the title of emperor, murdered by their own guards, murdered by rivals, murdered by usurpers. Crisis at the core of Roman governance. The state lost its steady hand. A distant governor might not know who truly ruled in Rome. Long-term planning became impossible. Local power grabs followed. Capable men avoided politics. They retreated to country estates. Lesser, corruptible men took charge. Political rot spread through civic life. Corruption became endemic. Money for repairing roads vanished. Funds for aqueducts vanished. Pay for soldiers vanished. Justice was sold to the highest bidder. Public spirit faded. People stopped thinking as Romans. They thought only of their own families, their own towns, their own households. Trust between rulers and people broke down. A provincial governor, late at night, by a flickering oil lamp. He is counting coins by candlelight. Chests that should be full are nearly empty. He writes to Ravenna pleading for reinforcements. He pleads for funds to repair a collapsing bridge. No reply for months. The local legion is underpaid. Its loyalty is fraying. He looks at a darkened town square. He feels profound isolation. The decay is also social. The gap between senatorial elites and the impoverished widens. A few elites own latifundia spanning thousands of acres. Small farmers are driven off by taxes and debt. Displaced people flood the cities. They become a restless, dependent urban proletariat. The social fabric frays patrons and clients, shared festivals, pride in local monuments. People become strangers to neighbors. Loyalties shrink to the city, then to the front door. The second wound was money, or the lack of it. The sheer scale of the Roman Empire made it ruinously expensive to maintain. An immense army was required to guard thousands of miles of frontier, the cold forests of Germania, the deserts of Syria. A vast bureaucracy was needed to administer provinces and collect taxes. These essential functions demanded a constant, massive flow of revenue. For centuries, Rome had funded itself through the spoils of conquest. But when the empire stopped expanding around the 2nd century AD, this primary source of income dried up. The state was left with all the expenses of an empire, but without the profits of war. To make up for the shortfall, successive emperors resorted to desperate measures. They raised taxes to crushing levels, particularly on the agricultural sector. This drove many small landowners into bankruptcy, forcing them to abandon their farms, or sell themselves into the service of wealthy aristocrats. The emperors also began to debase the currency. They would melt down existing coins, mix the precious silver with cheaper metals like copper, and then mint more coins of lesser value. While this provided a short-term fix, it ultimately led to runaway inflation. The price of everyday goods, like grain and oil, skyrocketed. Grain, oil. A soldier's pay, once a handsome sum, could barely buy him food. Imagine a marketplace in a provincial town. A baker stands behind his stall, his face grim. A loaf of bread that cost 1 denarius a generation ago now costs 50. The coins he receives are thin, flimsy pieces of metal that feel light and worthless in his hand. He, in turn, has to pay more for the wheat he buys from the countryside, a price that keeps climbing every season. Farmers, squeezed by taxes and unable to make a living, are planting less. The once reliable supply of grain from North Africa and Egypt has become sporadic due to piracy and political turmoil. North Africa, Egypt, pirates and political turmoil disrupting shipments. The economy, which once flowed like a mighty river, has slowed to a stagnant, muddy trickle, stranding everyone in its mire. This economic strain had a devastating effect on the cities, the jewels of Roman civilization. Without a steady flow of tax revenue and the profits of trade, municipalities could no longer afford to maintain public works. Aqueducts fell into disrepair, their life-giving water slowing to a drip. Public baths closed. Temples were left to crumble. Forums fell silent and were scavenged for building stone. The vibrant, interconnected world of the Mediterranean began to fracture. Trade routes became dangerous and unprofitable. A city that had once feasted on Egyptian grain and Spanish wine now had to survive on what it could grow locally. Egyptian grain, Spanish wine. The city surviving on immediate vicinity produce. The third wound was inflicted from the outside. For centuries, the Roman Empire had been an island of relative order, surrounded by a sea of peoples the Romans dismissed as barbarians. Along the long frontiers of the Rhine and Danube rivers, Goths, Vandals, Franks lived in a state of constant flux. For a long time, the mighty Roman legions had kept them at bay through forced diplomacy, strategic fortifications. But in the late 4th century, this delicate balance was shattered. A nomadic people from the steppes of Central Asia, the Huns, swept into Eastern Europe, creating a domino effect of displacement and terror. Fleeing the Hunnic advance, entire peoples, numbering in the tens of thousands, were pushed up against Rome's borders. The Visigoths, for example, appeared on the banks of the Danube in 376, not as an invading army, but as a desperate nation of refugees begging for asylum within the empire. Rome's response was disorganized and brutal, leading to a catastrophic revolt that culminated in the Battle of Adrianople, where a Roman emperor was killed and his army annihilated. This event marked a turning point. It showed the world that the Roman army was not invincible. It also demonstrated that the barbarian problem could no longer be managed with walls and forts alone. The outside world was now pressing in with overwhelming force. Rome's strategy for dealing with these groups began to change out of necessity. Unable to defeat them all militarily, the empire began to co-opt them. It hired entire tribes as mercenaries, known as foederati, to defend the frontiers. In exchange for land and payment, these Germanic warriors would fight for Rome. This was a pragmatic but dangerous solution. A Gothic soldier, fighting under his own chieftain, might feel more loyalty to his commander than to a distant, faceless emperor in Ravenna. A Frankish general who rose to prominence in the Roman army might see an opportunity to carve out his own kingdom from a weakening province. The army itself began to lose its Roman character. The borders, once clearly defined and heavily guarded, became porous and indistinct. Forts were abandoned as legions were pulled away to fight in yet another civil war. Raiders found it increasingly easy to slip across the frontier to plunder undefended towns and villas. Imagine a farmer living in northern Gaul. For generations, his family had lived within sight of a Roman watchtower. Now the tower is empty. Soldiers no longer patrol the road. He hears rumors of armed bands roaming the countryside. He and his neighbors must now look to a local strongman, perhaps a wealthy landowner with his own private militia, or even a Germanic chieftain, for the protection the Roman state can no longer provide. His world has shrunk, and his allegiance has shifted. Life has changed in a very immediate way. As the central authority of the state weakened, life itself began to change. The great cities, engines of Roman culture and commerce, began to shrink. Populations declined drastically. People fled to the countryside, and successive waves of plague swept the empire. With fewer people came fewer skilled artisans, architects, and engineers. Sophisticated knowledge to maintain aqueducts and hypocaust heating systems was gradually lost. Urban markets grew dim as long-distance trade routes became too dangerous and unprofitable. A city that once imported marble from Greece now made do with wood and scavenged stone. A profound spiritual shift was underway. Christianity rose from persecuted sect to state religion. Its message offered hope, humility, and salvation in the afterlife. Pagan gods still stood in marble temples, but their grip on people was waning. Christianity didn't directly cause Rome's fall, but it changed what people valued: a heavenly kingdom over temporal glory. Power centralized in Rome fragmented. The empire was split into an eastern half and a western half. Constantinople, wealthy, urban, defensible. The West, poorer, rural, politically fractured. Their destinies drifted apart. A farmer with cracked, calloused hands stands at his ancestral field. The tax collector has taken his last seed grain. He can no longer survive as a free man. He packs his few belongings onto a cart, says goodbye to his village, and travels with his family to the fortified villa. He becomes a colonist, a serf bound to the land. His children grow up speaking a mixed dialect beside the local Germanic garrison. Their world is defined not by the emperor in Ravenna, but by the lord in the big house on the hill. The long, slow decline was punctuated by moments of sharp, shocking violence that sent tremors throughout the Roman world. In 410, the city of Rome itself was sacked by the Visigoths under their king, Alaric. For 3 days, the Goths plundered the ancient capital. While the physical damage was not catastrophic, the psychological impact was immeasurable. This was the first time in 800 years that the city had been taken by a foreign enemy. The idea of eternal Rome, a cornerstone of Roman identity, was shattered. Augustine in North Africa, Jerome in Bethlehem, received the news with disbelief and horror. If Rome itself could fall, what on earth was safe? The blows kept coming. In 455, the city was sacked again, this time more brutally, by the Vandals. They systematically stripped the city of its remaining wealth over 2 weeks, shipping treasures and even the bronze tiles from the roof of the Capitoline Temple back to Carthage. Each of these events was not a cause of the fall, but a symptom of the advanced disease. The empire was now too weak to defend its own heartland, let alone its symbolic capital. Power had drained away from the emperor and was now held by powerful barbarian generals who commanded the armies and controlled the court from behind the scenes. The final act, when it came, was quiet and almost anticlimactic. In 476, the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor. This emperor was a young boy, Romulus Augustulus. Odoacer did not bother to kill the boy. He simply pensioned him off and sent him to live in a countryside villa. Odoacer did not claim the title of emperor for himself. Instead, he sent the imperial insignia, the diadem, the purple robe, and the scepter, to the Eastern Emperor in Constantinople, with a message that the West no longer required an emperor of its own. In that moment, an institution that had lasted for 500 years simply faded away. People living in Italy, Gaul, or Spain at the time may not have even noticed the significance of the event. Their lives were already governed by local Gothic kings, Frankish kings, or Vandal kings. The office of the emperor had become an irrelevance. The map of the West had been carved into a mosaic of new, smaller kingdoms. The Roman world did not end with a bang, but with the quiet administrative decision of a barbarian general. The grand unified political structure of the Western Roman Empire was gone, replaced by a new and uncertain reality. Yet life does not simply end when an empire falls. The great Roman roads, still the best routes for travel, continued to be used for centuries. Many towns kept their basic Roman street plans. Farmers still planted grain in fields tilled since the Republic. Latin did not disappear. It slowly mixed with Germanic tongues, French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese. The end was not a sudden stop, but a long, slow transformation. New kings were not simple destroyers. Many had served in the Roman army and admired Roman civilization. They adopted Roman legal codes, tax systems, administrative practices. They minted coins in the Roman style. The legacy of Rome was absorbed and adapted. The Roman world slowly became medieval Europe. In the East, the empire continued for another 1,000 years. The fall is a story of loss, change, and resilience. A long, slow turning of the world. Foundations: trust, shared identity, economic stability. When those foundations erode, walls and armies cannot hold. Roads, aqueducts. The end comes as a cascade of small choices. Millions seeking safety, security, a better life for their children. Great things fall, but small essentials remain. A scholar copies books by candlelight. A mason reuses a carved Roman stone. A priest lights a candle beneath a cracked fresco. These small acts preserve memory and carry echoes forward. Rome passes from lived reality into powerful memory. Stones and laws become foundations. Silent now, the ruins hold their lesson. That lesson still speaks to us.